To seek truth requires one to ask the right questions. Those void of truth never ask about anything, because their ego and arrogance prevent them from doing so. Therefore, they will always remain ignorant. Those on the right path to truth are extremely heart-driven and childlike in their quest, always asking questions, always wanting to understand and know everything, and are not afraid to admit they don't know something. However, every truth seeker does need to break down their ego first to see truth. If the mind is in the way, the heart won't see anything. That's Susie Kasem from Rise Up and Salute the Sun. Coming Forth into the Light by Susie Kasem. I was born the day I thought, what is, what was, and what if? I was transformed the day my ego shattered, and all the superficial, material things that once mattered to me before suddenly ceased to matter. I really came into being the day I no longer cared about what the world thought of me, only on my thoughts for changing the world. That's Susie Kasem. I'm the Great Baldini, and these are Unintended Consequences. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you're joining us from. We're glad you're here for episode 6 of Unintended Consequences, where the music is original, the content is organic, and the possibilities are endless. Stay with us for more Unintended Consequences. And good morning. Hopefully, you guys can hear everything okay, and we're live here. Appreciate everybody coming this morning. It's always great to be here, and this is again becoming kind of the highlight of my week here. So this week we're going to do, well, a little something different, and I'll kind of explain as we go along today, of course, called Q&A, questions and answers, where we address some listener questions. And this was brought about last week by a great question that appeared in the comments section, and I decided to address it. I was going to do a video response to this, and once I got started, well, some things occurred, and it's, again, kind of frustrating, especially since doing media is, I have a long background on this, doing it professionally, and so it becomes kind of a frustration when things don't go well. I'll try to explain it, just not making excuses, just just revealing what's happened. So I decided to do this in a live stream, and we'll explain why, or I can get to that now. So I had began doing this as a video, and so I guess I'll have to back up a little bit and let you know that. So it was a few years ago. I think we're coming up on 5 or 6 years now. My wife and I went through we got kind of suckered, punched out of nowhere, in which she had a long-standing, like 18 plus years, working for the second largest legal firm in Seattle, in a management position, and I had a audio company. I was doing tour sound for a couple of artists, and one of them had been doing it for a long time. It was a 16-piece funk band, and most of them had major label experience. They were kind of semi-retired, but doing festivals, that sort of thing. Another artist was a country artist who had been, I won't give you the year, you'll look it up and find out, but he had been voted CMA's Best New Unsigned Artist for a recent year, and had been getting a lot of opening support acts for major label concerts. And so as a result, I was touring with those guys, and then had a high-end production system that I was using to fill in some stuff. And so anyway, we were comfortable, doing okay. Had a nice house on the lake, south end of Seattle. And then, just things happened. The funk band guys decided to retire. And then just a few weeks later, discovered that my other artist had decided to get married and was moving to Salt Lake City. And I had recently moved back to Seattle from Salt Lake City. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So both my primary artists left. And when we were trying to figure out how to manage that, unexpectedly, well, maybe it shouldn't have been unexpected. But anyway, my wife got downsized. And so we went from a fair income to, nothing. And we had a little bit of savings, but we foolishly, and I suppose naively, expected that, we had paid into the system all these years, that we would, be able to get some assistance and get back on our feet fairly quickly. Well, let me tell you what, that's not how it works out. They basically looked at us like we had two heads, like, what is wrong with you? No, you get no help. And so we very nearly ended up homeless. So we were actually living in a 22-foot travel trailer for the better part of almost 3 years as we were trying to get back on our feet. And so all that to get here, I'm not complaining or whining. I'm just saying that, so having had, a full recording studio worth of gear, and also a tour sound company, I ended up having to sell pretty much everything, and then was left with very nearly, nothing. But one of the things that also occurred was the two production computers that I had to do audio and video editing on, as well as having all my life's work basically on it, were basically lost in a storage place that was, it was a place that we were paying rent on. Anyway, they illegally locked us out when we were moving out. So it was just a hassle anyway. So it was left with basically nothing. And so in order to do these shows, because I don't have 1,000 subscribers and I can't do it with a remote device, because pretty much all I have is an iPad. So I borrowed a laptop from where I work, just to do the streams, because again, without 1,000 subscribers, which clearly I don't have yet, I can't do live streaming from a portable device. So I have to use a desktop of some kind. So I borrowed a laptop to do these podcasts. Well, it was several years old when I first started using it, a number of years ago, right? So it is just like, dual processor, really like 2.4 gigahertz. It's pretty, anyway, it chugs pretty hard when you try to do anything. And so when I tried to render videos, and this is kind of what happened in the first, I had intended to launch a podcast the 1st of March. And then I told you before, there's technical issues. I got blocked, but really even that was just mostly an audio stream, because the video stream, every time I tried to render it just would chug and crash. And so anyway, that's what happened this time. So I just decided it's so much easier just to do a live stream and do that. So we have some, anyway, we'll talk about some questions at the end about perhaps we can find a way around that. Anyway, so but the question, there's a number of questions that we have today. But I'm going to start with this one, which is actually what began this whole thing to begin with. Was a great question from Alexander in the comment section of our last week's video, and it was well thought through. And even though it's on a topic that a lot of people get uncomfortable with, which is dealing with matters of spirituality, specifically religion, even more so specifically the Bible. A lot of people are really emotional about this issue on both sides. And I suppose, as well they should be, spiritual matters are really go to the center of who we are and what we are. I think there's no living person who has not at some point considered these matters of who we are, what we're doing, and why we're here. Matt from Quantum Conscious, I think he came up with a great little saying, which is the meaning of life is to discover that life has meaning. And I think that there is some wisdom in that. Certainly, I've seen that one of the worst things that can happen to people is that they give up hope, and moreover, that they are purposeless and they are basically without a rudder in the middle of a storm. They have no reason to keep going. They have nothing to drive them. They have no hope, no purpose, no reason for being, and that can be just absolutely devastating to people. And so these matters of who we are and why we're here, and moreover what surrounds us. Again, cosmology, and cosmogony has become a hot topic of late, including what's the shape of the Earth and what is the nature of it. These things, again, people respond in very passionate ways to this, and in fact, again, surprisingly so. The vitriol that gets launched is really, again, to me, and I've said this before, an indication that some of these things are artificially placed there, that the response that people have and the anger that it engenders is to such a degree that it would very clearly indicate that is not a natural response, especially that it occurs so often and in such an exact, the verisimilitude in each occasion is remarkable, that everybody responds the same way. And again, all of us, even those who have looked into it and accepted that what we've been taught is a lie, we all had I think a similar response of like, this is crazy, right? And we want to denigrate it and just dismiss it with a hand wave. And those of us who really looked into it, then I think many of us came to agree that while we may not know for certain what it is, we can say what it is most likely not, and that's what we've been told. And that is true, I think, for almost everything we've been told, is that it's simply not the way that they have described it. And the more I look into it, the more I realize that is almost universally true, that everything that I look into is, in one way or another, not as described, sometimes almost wholly upside down. Very often I find that the 180-degree inversion almost would be too easy to read it, right? So it's just kind of bent a little bit around the corner. It's like 172 degrees, right? Just enough to throw you off. Welcome, Israel. Welcome, Plasso, Jay Armstrong, Allison, Brian, Janet, and all the folks, Megzi, Dawn, Sue, all you folks that regularly come here weekly. I so appreciate you, and this is why I do this. So I appreciate your support and the encouragement that you give me. So these matters of greatest import, ultimately, when you look at philosophy, ontology, and you look at the epistemology of all the things that we look at and study when you get these multidisciplinarian things, this is no exception to the rule of everything is not as they've described it. So, in other words, not just the place that we live and not just our history has been obfuscated, occluded, and destroyed in many cases and hidden from us. But along with that is who we are and what we are and where we are and who else might be here with us. And so I think it's understandable, certainly, that people have very strong feelings and emotions about this. But again, many people's emotions seem to be on the order of magnitude that would, to me anyway, indicate that it is an unnatural, artificial creation, a sort of emotional landmine created to cause cognitive dissonance should these issues ever arise or they be pressed on them. Most people can easily dismiss new information right away with just the quickest of hand waves, but when pressed on it or they begin to think about it, often it begins to shake their foundations a little bit. And again, to quote Crow 777, belief is the enemy of knowing. And again, I have said before that from my experience, the biggest, most profoundly epiphanal moments that I have stumbled upon have often come as the direct result of letting go intentionally of previously held beliefs such that I could receive new information, because when you hold on to things with such tightness, you prevent yourself from allowing new information to really come in and be considered. And it's often been said that that's the mark of an intellectual, or at least an open-minded person, to be able to hold and entertain a thought without necessarily accepting it, but you entertain it without just quick dismissal, and consider it. And I have, to a great degree, on many of my thoughts and beliefs, come to a place of backing up to a level of saying, I just don't know, right? The answer. I can be fairly well convinced, and sometimes even, speak with what might seem like certainty, certainly conviction on items, because I have a certain level of personal experience with it. I'm convinced to an extent that I'm comfortable with and that works for me. But never do I intend to I believe that there are universal, concrete, eternal truths. I think those are out there. I think they exist. But I think that it is very difficult and almost impossible at this point for mankind to truly understand those in a way that is holistic, and that we can see the entire construct of it. That it would require that you have a total ability to see all the angles, all of it, every perspective at once. And I think that there is only one being, from my perspective, who's able to do that. We simply cannot. And I've told the story before about the kids, the little ragamuffins there in the 1930s who looked in the boxcar for the elephant. They'd never seen one before. The circus came to town. They looked through the knotholes in the boxcar at the elephant one, and each of them described something different: a big gray tree trunk, a big gray snake, a big gray cow, or what have you. And they began to argue to the point that they came to fisticuffs on what was contained within this boxcar. And yet, of course, they were all they were describing perfectly what they saw. They simply did not have a large enough perspective to perceive the whole thing. And so none of them were wrong. And yet, there are arguments against the others that because the other view differed from theirs, it must therefore be wrong. Once we adopt a viewpoint that is to us the right way, then that typically means that we go into this black and white concrete thinking that anything other than that must be wrong. And I would submit that is a logical fallacy, that there are numerous things that can be described effectively and accurately, but which do not themselves convey the entire picture and give a person the entire understanding of a thing. And so we are limited in our understanding, and I think that especially applies to the things that are unseen in this world, that I think many of us have experienced to a level that is, at least again, to our satisfaction, that there is as much, if not more, activity, what we would say, behind the veil than what we can see in the material world. That there is certainly truth. There are, if you want to say, beings or entities or intelligences that operate outside the visible spectrum of light. And this should be really easily grasped in the fact that of the electronic spectrum that we know of, we only are able to perceive less than 10% of it. Of our ears and our eyes, we have a very limited visible spectrum. There's a ton of electromagnetic spectra that exist outception. We know that even animals can see into these infrared and ultraviolet spectra. We know that elephants use subsonic spectra of hearing to communicate with one another. And so there's a vast amount of the world around us that we cannot perceive, and this should be, again, easy to accept. But the idea has been presented to us in over time and with a great deal of persuasion, I think, that that this is hyper-materialistic, and that anything that we even imagine that might be beyond the veil is a fantasy. An imagination, in fact, means that you are mentally unstable, that you're not with reality, because you perceive a reality that's beyond what we can sense immediately. And of course, to that I say poppycock. And it is my contention, or at least my understanding, from the way I see things, that in mankind's past, we were much more than we are now in every conceivable way. And that includes our ability to perceive things. And what I think part of that is what lies behind the veil. One of the first things, in fact, one of the things that really just infuriates me about the powers that ought not be in the world that we're in, is that even at birth, and we've talked, I think a number of people have talked about the trick that's played on us to ignore the 9 months in the womb and to consider that that zygote and ultimately that fetus is not a living being until it pops out. Right. And even then, they're considering, retroactive abortions, that like past delivery abortions, to be a viable thing, because they want us to just consider that to be fine and acceptable. And again, I don't want to get into the argument over over choice or abortion. That's not the point. The point is that many people have pointed out that, again, we are a living being prior to our appearance through the canal, to be, at the birth, to come, be a membership in this world, and all that implies. So we have been deceived, even in that, and it's been shown that, that in babies within the womb, they respond to external stimuli, voices, music, all that sort of stuff. So, but what infuriates me is the very moment that you're born, one of the very first things that they do is put silver nitrite in your eyes. And supposedly this is to prevent infant conjunctivitis, which is, again, poppycock. So few would ever get it anyway, but they do this to all babies. And of course, the sort of, I guess, urban myth is that all babies have blue eyes. Well, that's only true because they put the silver nitrate in their eyes, and the silver is what makes them turn blue. And what it does essentially is blind you to specific spectra, so that you cannot see. They literally blind us from birth, and it makes me so hostile I can't even. Yeah, I don't even want to go there. But certainly, again, we see that children believe in magic and the unseen, and often they can see things that we cannot until we tell them not to, and then ultimately, over time, they begin to either keep it to themselves, as I did, or literally not see it anymore. And to a degree, by keeping it to myself and not pursuing it for a period of time, it certainly became more difficult. I think it just does as you get older. You get more of a filter system, and your limbic system grows to a degree that you reject those things that don't match with your beliefs already. And so you begin to reject these things. To that end, again, back to the idea of spirituality and what it means. And spirituality is, again, it's a weird word to me. I think I have said before that English is a very poor language to describe some of these things. It's very good for visual manifestation and observations, but it's very poor to discuss matters of the heart and things of philosophical nature, where other languages, for example, Latin is very, very good at those things and carries intent. It's an inflected language, so it carries intent of the verb within the verb. So as you express it, you know exactly what's going on there. And there's very many high-minded ideas held within that, such that we still use them. Status quo, quid pro quo, pro bono. Again, we use these ideas to very well express what is poorly expressed in different languages. Is water wet? Yes, that is one of the physical properties of water. And I'm actually weirdly going to cover a little bit about water later. Water is fascinating, most incredible, mind-boggling, mythical thing in our physical world, and it exists in a state that causes confusion among material scientists. It doesn't respond in the way that other things should. And there are at least 49 physical properties that it's anomalous, but that doesn't even include some of the more mystical things, such as the work of Dr. Emoto, that it takes an impression of intention, and in fact, as I got deeper into research, it actually seems to show intelligence and thought. A mind-blowing thing. So I've been doing more than 2 years now studying the properties of water. It is a fascinating thing, and hopefully we'll be talking about it on an upcoming Crow 777 radio show. But yes, water is water is a fascinating thing. But one of the physical properties is water is wet. I know it sounds weird, but it's a property of its covalent bonds can open up to cling to other things, and so. Anyway, so back to this thought of so the spiritual manifestation, in part, like everything else, has been misdescribed. We're told that it's a hyper-materialistic world, that any perception or thought, any notion of things beyond the veil is not only fantasy and mere fiction, mythical, and that if we have a belief in it, that we are mentally deficient, probably insane. The old meme sort of goes that when you talk to God, it's prayer. When God talks to you, it's psychopathy or schizophrenia. So that's that's what we've been taught. So like everything, it's been misdescribed. One of the things that has come up frequently, and is the idea of the nature of the Bible, its authoritativeness, where does it come from, who wrote it, what's its intention. Again, this is a very passionate topic amongst a number of people. And again, understandably so, these are, again, matters that deal with not only spirituality, but what we would consider the nature of our existence after we leave this physical realm. And were we here before? And what happens after? And this is one of those things where I often say, I revert to, I don't really know. And what it seems to me is that, very few people here know, and I say especially in this area, that absolute certainty is the eminent domain of frauds and fools. If they claim to know for certain, they are either deluded or they are lying to you, because no one from here, other than at least one that I know of, that at least I think so, left and came back. But very few from, nobody over here knows, and nobody from there is coming back to tell us what happens when we perish. And so this carries with it a huge burden of import, and it becomes a very hot topic, and one of those things where it's been long said that polite people don't talk about religion or politics. Well, and then the argument can be made that that's why people can't have polite conversations about religion and politics, is because they've spent all this time not doing it, and so they just go into automatic being triggered, and they defend their own. And again, this is an area where people really struggle to be open to other ideas that are not their own, to entertain them. And again, so when we get to the Bible, I find it interesting where this phrase commonly comes up. Well, it's just a book written by men. All right, fair enough. Where'd you get that idea? In a book that I read, written by a man that carries with it only the authority of it. If it appeals to you and what you want to think, if it gives you a good justification for what you already believe, then it's good for you. And this is absolutely true within the Bible. There are, as a student of Scripture for a long time, there are a wide variety of things that are fairly nebulous or written in a poetic, very loose, open to interpretation. And even Jesus, again, according to the Gospels, what he said was he asked people on a couple of occasions, what does it say, and how do you read it? So he fully acknowledged that we're going to interpret these things in a way that often is, commutable to us, that it's something that appeals to us, and we're using it to support and give authority and weight to our own ideas. And this is common to the nature of man, and something that I probably will want to speak to in more depth later. But the basic premise is that my view on the tale of the forbidden fruit and eating the apple, again, I don't think it was an apple, but it was a fruit that specifically said it was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Not the tree of knowledge, not the Prometheus story, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And to me, this speaks of judgment. Again, specifically, Jesus said, judge not, that you be not judged, because by the same measure you judge, you will be judged by that. So again, he didn't say, don't judge. He said, well, don't judge, because you will be judged by the same measure that you measure it out. So I think it's a given understood that, again, people have a tendency to defend their own beliefs. And so going back to this idea of having eaten this forbidden fruit, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is right immediately after the fall in Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, I believe it is. It opens with the words that, so when the Elohim, and says that they, so when the Elohim saw that man had reached out forth his hand and eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he says, this is not good, right, that they have done this. And what happens if they reach out their hand also and eat from the tree of life and live forever? We can't allow this to happen. And I always struggled with that. I just thought, wow, are you threatened by us? Are you petty? Is that what that is? I have come to understand it in a very different way since then, that it was a gift, that death became a gift to prevent us from coming to the full realization of what we are and what we've done. And I'll get to that in another episode or on another topic. But ultimately, the story there, as I see it, is that what happened is that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what it did to us, what it said, it opened their eyes to know good from evil. And to me, this reads very much that, again, it gave us the ability to judge. We began to then be God in that we judged everything, but we are limited in our capacity to see and understand all the perspective of things, so we cannot see things in their fullness. And therefore, our judgment is always wrong because we cannot see every angle. We don't have the capacity for it, and we certainly don't have the ability for it. So that it puts us in a place where we begin to judge all things according to us sitting in the central seat. We are the hero in the hero's journey. So that we now judge all things, including God. Well, if God, what kind of God would allow, babies to get cancer and die? Okay, you're judging him. Without knowing, you don't know the whole story. And what if the child was, going to be potentially exposed to horrible suffering later? Well, again, some are, but what if the immediate death at birth prevents them from that? Again, could be love. I don't know, right? These things I don't know because I realize I would be a very bad deity because mostly there would be a lot of smiting going on. I would be doing all kinds of smiting of people that I smite thee because of the crap that they do, especially to children, right? So at one point, again, I did anger and substance abuse counseling. And so anger management, one of the best descriptions I've ever seen of anger is it's a powerful emotional response to a perceived, it's a motivation to correct injustice. And that is a really solid definition because it does cause us to want to fix things and set it right, to bring some comeuppance to those who have caused harm. Even if that is perceived and just a slight, even if people are, again, incorrect about what that injustice is, it does cause them to become angry, right? And again, even in Scripture, the Bible says, be angry, but sin not. So it's not that you're not supposed to be angry, it's that you should not sin in being angry. So again, I've been talking a lot about the Bible and like, what is it, and am I a Bible thumper and all that sort of stuff. So I want to give you, this is kind of what we come here. I wanted to give these answers because some of the questions asked by Alexandra were just so good and so prescient. I wanted to cover these. And again, I'll begin this by saying that I don't pretend to be an authority or that I have, I can say any of this, my views are right. Only that this is how I see it. I have, what are my qualifications? I've been a student of Scripture for pretty much all of my life. Was raised in a very religious background. That made it more difficult for me, I think. To some degree, you must unlearn most of that if you're going to have a successful relationship with your Creator because, again, like most things, there is this patina of misdescription that comes on everything, whether that's, the nature and shape of the earth, whether that's our history, or whether that is the spiritual journey that we're on. All things have been, for the most part, misdescribed and in some way inverted to a place that we want to, again, see them a different way, or we've been lied to, and so whatever we hold to is a lie. And I think when I read this to you, I think you'll understand it, why I was drawn to this question, certainly because Alexandra lays it down, I think, very clearly. So I'll begin with this and then kind of get to his question. So this is direct from Alexandra. We most likely agree that we're caught in a web of lies and that behind all of these layers of reality, there must be some kind, probably dark force, which is pulling the strings of our thoughts, behavior, and actions for a long time. I certainly agree with that, although I think that it is not just a dark force, but there is, light and dark, and it's very similar to, I think, what's been described both in the Bible as well as other literature and scriptures from different faiths, that there is a creator and there is a malevolent being who is in rebellion. That's kind of the overview of the story. Okay. The lies are so multi-layered that most of us who are able to work through one level are bound to get duped by another lie on a deeper level we forgot or missed to question. Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm getting to, is that it is multi-level. We always find that, we get into running down these rabbit holes, and then sooner or later you bump into one that, you begin to understand that the crazier it sounds, the more likely it is to have some meat on it. But not every one of them, not every one of these, conspiracy theories is accurate. And in fact, again, most of them fall short in some ways because we don't have all the information to know for certain. We can only speculate and hypothesize about much of it. All we can really do is disprove what we know to be untrue. And this is why I say that calling ourselves truthers is to some degree a misnomer, because we don't know what the truth is, but we do break apart the lies, or the poppycock, as Rose and I have begun doing. Quick plug, shameless plug, every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, UTC -7, Rose 777 from the Crow 777 radio, and Secrets of Saturn, and she's Jason Lindgren's principal squeeze and most awesome person, and Crow's right-hand wall man. She and I have begun doing the Poppycock Report, in which we take on all things poppycock, balderdash, and heinous fuckery, most foul. So catch us with that every Tuesday and Thursday morning live for about an hour at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. All right, so shameless plug over. Now back to this question from our friend Alexander. All right, so we're so happy to have lifted the veil and look at the truth, air quotes there, that we don't realize that we're only looking at another layer of lies that we've accepted as truth, mostly because it sounds right and good and profound, and because it was never questioned before, was taught to us by people of stellar moral integrity, or at least we thought so, and obviously had a positive effect on life and appears to be the polar opposite of evil. I have no argument with that. In fact, I think that's kind of what I was trying to say in a long way, where Alexander really cut to the point there. It sounds good and right to us. It seems profound. And so we can follow any one of a number of paths that appeal to us, that what we would say resonate to us in a way that, makes us, comfortable and that we can argue for. As an example, quite a lot of people, this is back to Alexander's question here. As an example, quite a lot of people question the validity of all the claims made about the current pandemic and expose many obvious lies and disinformation. But only a small fraction of those folks question germ theory and believe in some kind of magic virus which can be highly contagious, can be spread through the air, and can be killed with a myriad of remedies. Well, this is absolutely true. That many people are now waking up to the nature of at least some illusion, at least some kind of having distrust in the media and the government with this current, pandemic, as we call it. But most people, and even those within the truth community, haven't really taken the time to closely investigate germ theory, what it means, what it is, and the validity of it. We've accepted it much like we did everything else. We just never questioned these things. And so we accept it. One of the things that I've begun taking on, for example, is the periodic table of elements. I loved chemistry. I love most things. I love the sciences. It's Jay Armstrong. It's 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Time, and then 9 a.m. Eastern for the Poppycock Report. Sorry. But in any case, derailed my train of thought there. But in any case, these people don't really question, any of the periodic table of elements is one that I loved chemistry. I love all the material sciences, really science of any kind. I'm just a nerd. And I realized that chemistry is one of those things that works fairly well in the description we're giving, but also it was one of the reasons I had adopted and accepted the idea of a heliocentric model, because they've given us the atomic model as being, basically a microcosm of a macrocosm. So that what we saw is the proton in the middle, the electron spinning around in an orbit. They call it in orbitals, SP, D, and F suborbitals that contain electrons that whirl around in what is, again, it looks like this microcosm of a solar system, and the solar systems are a microcosm of a galaxy, and so on and so forth. And so you see this at every level. Well, when I realized that you could very easily take apart the heliocentric model and what that looks like in their cosmology, it can actually be fairly easily taken apart if you just, again, use your mind and some basic understanding of physics. You realize that unless you're trying to argue for it, you'll never get there. There's so much yeah but about it. It's just preposterous. And so those who have fallen into the trap of defending that model, I just have to say it's not being intellectual honest. It may be cognitive dissonance, and I'm not saying they're bad people or you're a bad person if you don't accept anything other, but really, honestly, this is some pretty basic stuff. When you apply the inverse square law, let's take a close look at gravity, take a close look at Michelson-Morley experiment. You see that none of these these claims have ever been proven scientifically. In fact, the contrary position has been proven in most cases, and they try to hide the data. When you see that, you just can't argue for it. I'm sorry. Anyway, so no potty humor on the PoppyCock report. No, there was some potty humor there. I made some admissions, but we try to stay away from it, for Rhodes's benefit, because she gets uncomfortable if you get down into the Trey Parker. Trey Clark version of humor. I love you, Trey, and I owe you a phone call. So we'll get to that. So in any case, let me get back to Alexander here. Very few people actually go the extra mile and research the history of virus theories and thus discover some hard facts about the existence of something like a virus in the first place. After all, it appears to be proven that polio was a virus which was cured through vaccinations. Case closed. So why look any further, right? Right? And you're just hitting it out of the park, Alexander. These are, again, very astute observations. The discussion about the usefulness of vaccinations or the pharmaceutical industry or the Rockefeller financial education of allopathic medicine and science, Moloch remains unharmed. Absolutely. Yes, informally hip. Thank you. I am naked. I am all natural. That's right. You're blind now, right? Aren't you glad that I don't use a camera? I knew you'd appreciate that. The discussion about the usefulness of vaccinations or the pharmaceutical industry or the Rockefeller financial education and silent smoker. Okay. I'm not sure if this is the right place for my questions. It's a perfect place, Alexander. But although I'll give you, again, you can always hit me up via email. We'll throw that. I'll put it in the show description at the end, and I'll give it to you. I'll spam it as well. Unintended.consequences3@gmail.com. You can always hit me up there. I'm not sure if this is the right place for my questions, but forgive me because I have no other place to ask them. And I have some hope that one of you dear readers or even me can share some insights you might not have considered before. I hope that I do that. I hope that I cover this in a way that at least you can understand. My point here is neither to try to convince or persuade you, but to explain to the best of my understanding, right? And this is based, again, largely on my experience, on my understanding over time. I'm not asking you to necessarily accept my views, only to try to understand them if you can, and that's the best I can do here. So here's the first one. What makes you believe that above this there must be some kind of a benevolent creator who for some reason lets the bad guys do their thing and interferes only occasionally and in mysterious ways in an apparent struggle of good versus evil? Well, I think that is the basic foundation of much of these questions. So let me try to address this backwards. Good morning, hippie regalia mom from Renton. I used to live on the south end there, between Renton and Skyway, on the south end of the Lake Washington there. A great view for a while. All right, so why do I believe this? So the struggle of good and evil. Again, this is described in almost every ancient description of the world, that when you get to the creation myth, all of them have these basic premise, right? They all kind of share the same storyline, is that there was a creator, kind of at least a group of people, usually the triumvirate, usually the triune, and speaks or sings or dances, and sees that it's good, creates a world and causes it to be inhabited with life. And afterwards, one of his other creations that he had created before, who does not exist inside this dimension, is in some way jealous or unhappy. The story goes, and I was fascinated to find this in Eastern religions because it was just something that I perceived and wasn't really aware of the story, but they have it that one of the jinn, and became the shaitan, or what we would say Satan, was one of the highest of the jinn, and that when God had created man and formed him out of the earth in clay, that he left him there for a week, and the jinn, the shaitan, was made of fire, and so he passed through and really closely considered this new creation, and he wondered what is going on here. And then ultimately, when he finds out that when he brings this being to life and then gives him dominion over this realm and says that you're mini-me, I made this place as a miniature representation of the entire universe, and you're the mini-me, and I put you in charge of it and give you dominion, that this really butthurt this being. And then when he says, when the Creator says, because I've made him like mini-me, give him oblation, not necessarily worship, but give him honor and respect as you would me, and bow before him. And this being says, the fuck you say? No way. I'm better than him, and no way am I doing that. And that began a prideful interaction. And so this being then became separate and rebellious against his Creator. And here's an interesting facet of it, is that at that point then, the result of this was basically a death sentence. And the argument then becomes, and this is from the shaitan, or who we would know as Lucifer or Satan, or whoever that malevolent being is, this argument. And almost all the arguments, the legal arguments, proceed from this, I would call it the left side, if you want to say left versus right paradigm, but, good, evil. I don't want to get into a political thing here. So if you give us free will, and we choose to exercise that free will by not obeying you, and the result is death, is that really free will at all? It is a punishment to end my existence because I choose not to obey you. Is that really free will? And that's a compelling legal argument. But the truth is, and this, again, this is the way that I see it, that the truth of the argument is, if you separate from perfection, if you separate from the source of power, the ultimate outcome is that you are powerless, and you separate from perfection, you are imperfection, and entropy begins, and it begins to fall apart until it dies. It's the natural result. It's not a punishment. It is the natural result of the action. And so the only way to stay in a state of perfection is to stay in the presence of and in perfect relationship with perfection. That's the only way to do it. If you choose to separate from that, then the natural result of unplugging the power saw from the outlet is that the power saw doesn't work anymore. It simply has no power. There might be some left in the capacitor or whatever, but that happens. And so I have often seen what happened in, again, the Genesis story of the fall, that, again, we've often seen this as sort of an arbitrary test, right? So it's a temptation. You can eat from any of those trees except for this one. Don't eat it or you're going to die. And then he does it. And then, so again, the sentence is death. I think, again, this is a limited human perception of it. And if we back up and look at this from a different aspect, what I see is that this was not a threat, but a warning. Hey, don't touch that, because when you do, it will cause devastation. It's a warning. Please don't. And then at the moment they did that, the universe being so perfectly balanced, and we know this from every aspect of science, it's got within 0.003% of all the physical laws of nature being so perfectly harmonized and in balance that if it were outside of that, nothing could exist. So by touching it, basically, this whole thing is this complex machinery of motion that's set on the tip of a pen. And as soon as it's out of balance, it dies. And the day you do it, you'll surely die. Now, again, it can be argued, and this was the argument of the serpent, right? Which is, did he say that, you will truly die? look at me, nothing's wrong with me. And in that moment they touched it. Did they drop dead? No. But if you drop a grain of sand into a car engine, you have immediately killed it. And it may take 20,000 miles for the damage to cause it to where it seizes up. But in that very moment, it is dead. And I think the same is true with this realm. The moment that man, again, disobeyed God and separated himself from perfection, then, that day it died. And ultimately, if he had allowed Adam to continue to live and see the results of what he had done, that would be such a cruel punishment indeed that death was a better solution to fall asleep, to be done with it. Again, this is my perception. But without a complete understanding, all of these things, again, become difficult to understand. And so that will lead me on to the, let me address one more part of this question because it's a deep question. Who for some reason lets the bad guys do their thing and interferes only occasionally. So again, this is my understanding of it. I retain the right to be wrong, but here's my understanding, is that also in that moment that man fell away from his creator and fell into the deception of his enemy. So one of the things that, again, going back to this tale, again, it's interesting that I saw it this way even before having read this tale. It's just confirmation to me that the enemy says, basically, the first thing that happens when his punishment is to be ended is that he asks the Creator for a favor, and the Creator gives it to him. He says, I want to let me carry on, let me continue to exist until the end of days, until this does all break apart and fall apart and is remade. And so he's granted that. And then immediately he uses this for his purpose of, like a jilted lover, if I can't have you, nobody can. He says, I will get them to hate you and I will turn them against you. And Dad says, you're going to do what you're going to do, but the ones who are mine, and they will love me. And this is exactly the way that I see him work, is that he doesn't force anyone to love him. But within part of this deal is that the deed to the title deed to this realm was then handed over to the enemy, who is all through Scripture, and again, every tradition, described as the Lord of the earth, the God of this world, that principalities, powers, dominion, that it was given dominion over to him. And so why does he let this continue? Because if he had taken it back, then it never would have been a gift in the first place. If you build a house for somebody and give them the deed, and then they tear it apart, and then they go, come fix it for me, right? It's not yours anymore to fix. You gave it to them. The deed belongs to them. And had you kept the deed, it never would have really been the gift in the first place, right? And so in order to take it back, then he would have had to go back on his word. He gave it to us. It was ours. We gave the deed away. We took it to a pawn shop, and now somebody owns it, and we're losing it in the shop. And so this is why he lets it continue, because it must run all the way to its end result to show this is the final consequence, that he's not being a dick, he's not being arbitrary, he's not being hateful or mean or any of the angry God that we've been told as what I think is a lie, because my personal experience with him indicates that he's only always ever love, that he's the very definition of love, and there is no darkness whatsoever in him. And the only things that I don't like, or people don't like, is when they kind of don't get their way. And if he doesn't do what I like, where I feel like I'm suffering, then I'm angry with him. Right? I shake my fist. Why don't you fix this? And because I don't know, and I don't have the ability to see all these things. So he shows up occasionally. Again, it's my understanding that he had a means and a method to want to then save people, that the cost of separation was indeed death, and that's why the need for blood, and blood seems to be a really powerful thing. It's used in almost every real magical ceremony. It's used in Luciferian stuff from the very first murder. Cain kills Abel. God says to Cain, his blood cries out from the earth. So it seems to be a very powerful thing, even in the Levitical commandments from Mosaic law. He says, don't eat blood as part of it, the blood of my enemies, and man, all this stuff seems to be, there's a very powerful component to blood that seems to be, if you will, magical. Hey, Karen B., welcome. So what I'm doing, Karen, for those of you who just joined, answering some questions. The first one is a very long one I'm getting into from Alexander, and he asks, again, a very deep question about the nature of the Bible and that sort of stuff, so I'm trying to answer as best I understand it. Okay, so I hope I kind of covered that a little bit. I'll get to the nature of kind of what it is, but I'll go follow his order of questions. If only an intelligent creator can explain our existence satisfactory to our understanding, who created the creator? I don't know that anyone did. Again, my understanding, if I were to tell you the story as I understand it, there was a being who existed. He was the only thing in existence for, time. I don't think exists in a way that we think about it in a linear fashion there, but there is some, passage. And so for eons and eons and eons and eons and eons and eons, more than you can possibly imagine, of being like we are, and inquisitive, wanting to know everything, learning everything, understanding everything, but over time, again, being the only thing that existed, such that the primary problem here, and it was dark, and again, he had to learn everything, but he was lonely, and so desperately, terribly lonely. Until at the one point in arguing with learning things, the difference between there's justice and there's grace and mercy and compassion. And so ultimately, it seems, separated himself into two complementary, like the yin and yang, like the masculine and the feminine, that there is justice and right and order and this firm, concrete truth. But there's also a need for compassion and love and forgiveness and grace, and that mercy and love is what gives justice meaning. That justice without compassion and mercy is meaningless, and it becomes brutal and harsh and arbitrary. And so they would argue these concepts and back and forth and philosophical forever and ever and ever, until at one point this loneliness drove them in a moment of desperation. And it seems to, from my perspective, even at the risk of itself. Is it a Bible study? Not really. It's just answering these questions. So I'm trying to, as best I can, explain this stuff. And again, if I get loquacious, that's how I am. If that's, but no, there's more questions to be answered. This is just the one that caused me to address this. So it's something that, again, I just wanted to address. But out of a sense of extreme and complete loneliness, and at the risk of its own existence, tore a portion of itself away to create another form of life, and that this was the only begotten Son, if you will, that this was the Son in a mother-father-son relationship. And at that moment, when that happened, he understood how to create life, and then from then on began creating all kinds of life in different ways, being a very creative. But that's who he is. So who created him? I don't know that anybody did, and it's something that, again, I don't really claim to understand, but that's what all the evidence leads me to. The preponderance of evidence. Why do we have to explain something that we cannot explain with something that we cannot understand with even less certainty? Well, again, here's my take, is that if he is who I think he is, and that's, again, this brilliant, unbelievably smart, beyond anything I can imagine, if he is an omnipotent and this perfect being that I've come to know, I don't think I'm ever going to really understand him. I just have to accept that what I've learned is true, which is that he's good always. Ultimately, for me, it comes down to the trust that I've learned, that I can trust that they are always good, and that when I don't understand, I can trust them. Do we really have to buy into the notion of duality of good and evil? I don't. Again, this is my perspective. I don't think so. I think that is, again, part of a lie. What's happened is the natural states of fluctuation and sort of circuitousness, these natural cycles of vortex that we see that were built in the positive and the negative, then we're stolen and sort of overlaid to the idea of there being duality, that in order for there good to be good exist, there must be evil as well. I don't believe that. I do think that the fact that there is evil demonstrates the difference between darkness and light and good and evil, but that you wouldn't, the idea that we wouldn't understand and appreciate good if we did not know what evil was. Again, I think that's an argument that can be made. I personally reject it because I think that you can have this. The arguments again are made, for example, in the Matrix movie, where Agent Smith says, we started with a utopia, but you rejected the programming because it's only in suffering that meaning comes. That philosophical argument has been made. I think it exposes who we are, but I don't think it necessarily is where we get our meaning from. The state is as it is. I can't change it. Again, I don't pretend to know all of it, but I reject the notion that the duality in the sense of good and evil is necessarily the same thing as a positive negative polarity. It's only been used to copy it, or it's a bad lie. To me, this way of thinking forces, back to Alexander's words, to me, this way of thinking forces us into the acceptance of the inevitability of one of two choices, thus limiting our thinking to either black or white, light or darkness, making the lesser evil the right choice and thus good, or at least better, and acceptable, while in reality, we can experience millions of colors of shades of gray. And this only represents only the observable spectrum of frequencies which surround us. That's a fantastic way of approach, and it makes very good logical sense from a specific philosophical point of view. That it does, but I think again, without the perspective of the rest of it and understanding the rest of the elephant, if you will, that there is sort of, in a way, only the one of two choices, which is to come into relationship with your creator and in harmony with who you are supposed to be and what you are supposed to be. It's the only way you can fully manifest who you're supposed to be. Anything else leaves you powerless and unplugged from the source, and therefore entropic dissolution begins, and it begins to manifest at a greater magnitude over time, so because of the vortex. And so by all the physical laws that were put into place, when you separate from the source of power, that's simply the natural result. It is not a punishment per se. It is simply the natural result of disconnecting from the original purpose. But I mean, that's how I see it. Again, I'm not going to claim right or wrong, or that if you don't think that way, you're stupid or you're missing it. I'm just saying over time, this is what I've come to, and it makes sense to me. So I'm trying as best I can to explain this the way I understand it. This brings me to the Bible, says Alexander. I have questions no one could answer so far satisfactorily. Maybe a kind reader. Again, I'll do my best. Who was capable of the art of reading and writing at the time that the first manuscripts were written down? He would assume that it's most likely indoctrinated priests or subservient scribes. So back to Alexander, your original comment about how we're caught in a web of lies, and each lie begins to unravel another one. This is, of course, going with the narrative that people in ancient past were uneducated, stupid, knuckle draggers, Neanderthals, cavemen, whatever, and that we have accelerated and grown in our understanding and wisdom over time. And again, I reject that notion largely on the premise of what we see physically, that we see ancient monolithic structures that we still cannot duplicate to this day. And that's just one evidence. There are numerous evidences that we have, again, been devolving at a rapidly increasing rate of frequency over time, so that we are just now a shadow of what we once were. And so many people were familiar with reading and writing back in the day, until you get to a place where, again, the Catholic Church is involved, and they rewrote history. And so whatever they did and wrote, I reject generally as that's a lie. There's probably some truth in it, and some, all lies need some element of truth to be believable. But over the most part, I would say the notion that only a few, educated and privileged people could read or write at the time it was written. Well, I don't know that. I don't have any evidence of that. Certainly, by the time Jesus came around, I mean, certainly by that time, everybody could kind of read and write. He was one of many who read in the temple. They had it all written down. So my understanding, well, let me read Alexander's bits here. The odds that authors were some kind of good enlightened people who were allowed to write down, quote, the truth, or some ancient knowledge which survived all these years seems pretty slim. Again, I understand that as an argument based on some of the information that was given, but keep in mind, from my perspective, the information we're given is damaged, right? And this is the same argument that you're using, which is that the information itself is damaged. So if you accept that all the information is damaged, then I think it should be pretty easy to accept that what we've been given in terms of the history and understanding of how things were is of itself damaged. So who wrote the Bible? I mean, if you're going to go to that question, here's my understanding and what I read is that for the most part, these are people who had an extraordinary encounter with a supernatural being that blew their fucking mind to an extent that they took extraordinary measures to write it down. But they also, being human, overlaid and injected their own understanding of things, which is by necessary, because we're human, limited. So they interpreted what they saw and what they experienced through the lens of what they believed to be true. And for many of the people who wrote much of what we consider the Bible, they came from either the son of Abraham, that lineage, later Israelites, root of David, then later Christian, and as you go through, But the people who wrote the Bible were primarily of this Jewish background, and so they all had the same mythos from which to work, and they had a similar understanding about who God was. But again, for many of them, they understood it in a certain way. So, for example, when you see, and the Lord was wroth with him and smote him, I go, really? Or did he just die an untimely death and you were pretty pleased about it because he was a shitty guy? And so, you wanted to write down that the Lord smote him because it made you feel good. There are a lot of things that I see when I read the Scripture that appear to me that way, that they, not necessarily of a malintent, but a limited understanding of what happened. They simply wrote down what they could describe. And this is what you see, for example, in Ezekiel and his description of what many people say, the UFOs, the wheel within the wheel. It's some very interesting language that he uses. But I think if you kind of lay back and try to understand what he's saying, he's doing the best he can to describe what he sees, and he just doesn't have the language for it. And so that's where I'm coming from, is that whatever errors that lie within at the outset, like what was its purpose, other than the historical stuff, which again probably written in a king's realm, and so he's got his own. He's got his own axes to grind. He's got his own way of wanting to write things down. Similar with priests and scribes, they've got their own way of, they're going to be influenced by power and control. That's the nature of people. But from me, the whole overview of things is that people are flawed, but most people try to write down as best they could their understanding of what's going on. They had an actual encounter with a supernatural being, but they did their best to interpret his actions, often mistakenly, and as a result, they put their own stuff into it. And then there's other things which, again, are so open-ended that we can easily change those into whatever we want them to be. People forever have taken and quoted scripture out of context. They take a couple of lines and they put it together and then say, well, what it really means is this. And I have a very difficult time with people who and again, there's many of those within our community, but they want to take the entire thing as an esoteric secret code. You got to have the super decoder ring to understand it. I just don't think that that's necessarily true. I think there is some evidence that, especially the first couple of books do have, they were written in such an amazing fashion that they do show some evidence of being in fact, perhaps divinely inspired, in the way that there's numeric values and codes sort of within them. It's possible, man. I don't leave anything off the table. But for the most part, especially like the letters in the New Testament, these seem to be, again, the writings of people who are trying their best to give an explanation of the way they saw it. But overall, what I see, I got a bunch of you leaving because you don't like the topic. That's fine. That's fine. I'm going to get to more stuff as well. But again, just wanted to wrap this up with, that. In the context of the whole thing, I think that the biggest value you're going to find in Scripture is it gives you, or at least the Bible as I read it, it gives you a background into what's going on. What you were basically born into this battle between forces that you didn't create. It's a war you didn't start. You may not want to be a part of, but it exists. Who the players are, kind of the overlay of what's going on, and some options that you have. And I think the primary option is to try to get into a relationship with the Creator, seek Him out, listen closely. It gives some descriptions of who and what and how He is. And some of those may or may not be accurate. Again, my understanding of reading the first few books of the Bible in the fall, I had a very different view of what that used to look like until I got to know Him. And then I see it in a different way. And so I think the entire thing is sort of an invitation to get to know Him and figure the rest of it out on your own. I think the danger in taking it all as word for word, this is the way you need to that these are rules to be kept, and this is, might beat you over the head with it, is an error. If you look at the Ten Commandments, and one of them is do not kill, and yet one of the, here's the patriarchal version, Abraham, the very thing God tells him to do is to sacrifice his son Isaac. So that goes against everything that you would be told, murder, infanticide, all this stuff. God would never tell you to do that. And yet it was his trust in God that caused them to get into a pact in the first place. It says later in the New Testament in Hebrews the whole story of it, and that it was through his immense trust in God, if you want to call it that, that he had promised him this son that he didn't get for forever. It was a big deal between him. It caused all sorts of hassle in his life, and finally he got this miracle child when they were way past age, and then he said, "Give it back up," and he agreed to do it. Right, so that he wouldn't withhold even that from his dad because he trusted him to be good. I think that's the key, right? But if you do this literal interpretation, and I don't mean not literal as in just make stuff up, but what I do mean is that if you take this rigid interpretation, this concrete hold, that everything in there is going to tell you what to do, and ignore the direct relationship with your Creator, then you're missing all of it. Because by that scope and by that definition, Abraham would have never done those things. See, it says right here, that's not the way God works, right? Blah, blah. And so he would have never had that action. So anyway, that's how I see it. What are the odds that when the selections of manuscripts made it in the Bible by the Vatican was the right ones were picked and not the ones that fit their agenda? Well, I mean, absolutely. Again, if you're going to when you put the Catholic Church in the mix, guaranteed they mess things up, and on purpose. But here's the one way I see it. If I wanted to take something that was absolutely true and discredit it, one of the best ways to do that is then to damage or make part of it easily discredited, and therefore you can discredit the whole thing by discrediting that. One of the easiest ways here's one of the easiest things to find. Go to the very end of the book of John, Gospel of John. When Judas dies, right, he goes out into the field and hangs himself. That he bought with his 30 pieces of silver that he was given for betraying Jesus. He gets his 30 pieces of silver. And he goes and hangs himself. Well, just a few pages later, in early parts of the next book, which is Acts, it tells the story of how, the first one, he threw the money back at their feet, the silver, he didn't want it, and then he went and hung himself. In the other telling, and just a few pages later, I think 5 or 6 pages later in the book of Acts, it describes how he took the money, bought a field, went out to inspect the field, and then his guts fell out, and the birds ate it, and it's called blood field to this day. So which story is right? Might be a combination of the two. I don't know, but it easily shows that there's some conflict and some contradiction there. So you can point this out and say, see, contradictory, you can't trust it. And so if you want to discredit more truth, you leave more truth in it with a little bit of stuff to discredit it rather than making it all a lie. I don't know, just makes sense to me. Can I prove that? Nah, not really. But I think I think it would be naive to think that somebody's going to not try to deceive you. And I think that there is that deception. But on the other hand, and here's the part that I think you can clearly see in the I think it's 30 pieces of silver, Cal for zero. I mean, I might be wrong, but I think it was 30 pieces. So I think that one of the things that we see is that they need our consent, that we have to choose to do this. We can't be, I mean, we can be hoodwinked and deceived, but they need our consent to do it. And so the way to do that, again, is to leave a good deal of the truth out there and say, this is the way it is, and give you the opportunity. But you tell a lot of lies about it so that people don't want to accept it. There we go. Let me try to get on to the next questions here. So what are the odds that the translations of Bible manuscripts are accurate, not tainted by agendas? I think they are, especially some of the later ones tainted by agenda. I certainly see it. I've done enough study through different translations, and even looking at interlinear Bibles using the original languages. And there are tools like Strong's Concordance and a Greek lexicon. Greek is still a living language. Much of the New Testament was written in Greek. You can go back and read it word for word and see what the original words kind of mean, and why things sometimes get translated one way versus another, and often that the translators' own opinions, again, the way they read it, gets put in, especially when you get to more paraphrase versus transliterations. Like the Message, which is a very popular modern Bible, which is a lot of paraphrasing. In some respects, it keeps true to some of the original ideas. In some ways, it's very far from what was actually said. So I think if you want to know, again, do study. Why do people get hung up on King James Bible? And I think that's the part of the next question here. And finally, assuming that these manuscripts were inspired by a God, again, I think they were inspired by people's interaction with it. I'm not sure it's it's sort of a transcription of like, here, boy, write this down. I don't think there's much of that. Some of it maybe, but doesn't look like there was much of it from, again, my perspective. I may just blow a bunch of people's these are all questions from one person, Green Queen. I do have questions from other people, and I'll get to those in a moment. But these were really good, and so I've spent a lot of time on it. But they were big, deep questions from Alexander. So finally, assuming all these manuscripts, but they were also representative of a lot of questions I get from people. So I thought it was a good way to start. So if these were all done inspired by a god, written down by an ancient goat herder or fisherman, made it into their entirety, or at least in their truthful essence, into the edits of the Vatican and translation through monks, what are the odds that the books, which was then published by a king out of the goodness of his heart, hardly, serve a purpose other than spreading the word of the Lord? Well, again, the reason that King James Version was written is because he was separating off from the church of the Catholic Church and making the Church of England. So he kind of did it as a poke in the eye, because they didn't want the translations into local languages. At the time, it was all Latin, and they controlled that. So he did it as a poke in the eye, not necessarily out of the goodness of his heart. It was to exert some kind of power at the time. Again, a lot of stuff we could get into here, and there we go. So he didn't want to offend anybody. I'm going back here to this. We'll wrap this up. Trying to be sarcastic or destructive, I didn't think so at all, and they weren't even I think it's fine to ask these questions. Anyway, what are the odds that anybody will read this? Well, I did. So as best I could, that's what I got for those. So then we have, so here we go. Dawn, informally hip. She asked a question about FEMA. Hey, by the way, you guys wake up. Stop talking about the Bible. Okay. All right. So many people are screaming about FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency here in the U.S. Many countries don't have FEMA. It's an American thing. I don't believe FEMA will happen the same way I don't believe the Nazis did what we're told by the mainstream narrative. I agree with that, or at least in the way they describe it. Just a moment, please, as I take a sip of coffee here. I'm getting dehydrated. Yeah, I know coffee's a diuretic, so dehydration doesn't happen, but. All right. So why would our enemy waste so much money to lock us up and feed us, clothe, house, shelter us? Why wouldn't it be easier and cheaper just to let us starve? Well, again, they have the means right now. They could have ended us a long time ago. So if our enemy's purpose was to just kill us all in one swell swoop, they would have done it already. Again, they don't want to do all the work themselves. They need a labor force to do it, and obviously a compliant one. So what they need is compliance and our submission. Um, it does seem that part of their goal with Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and the Georgia Guidestones is taking out a large scale of the population. I think this is possibly because they expect there to be some catastrophe. Again, I don't want to be a fear porn guy, but it does appear that the idea of what they would call an asteroid impact, or again, according to different biblical scripture plus other tales of woe, including Native American, is that there's some possibility of some big flaming rock hitting the earth and causing panic or devastation. Whatever it causes, it seems like they are expecting some catastrophe from which it would make it more difficult then for them to control large groups of people, because we could rise up against them. So they want to take us out before that happens so they can maintain control. That's the way I read it. Again, I reserve the right to be wrong. So this idea of FEMA, again, it just gives them power. FEMA as a group, I mean, I think every country in the Five Eyes has this. And so they're going to, again, do what they need to do to get compliance, irrespective of how many people there are. Currently, I think whether, again, the FEMA camps here's, again, the way I'm reading it, is that all the efforts that they've made so far, and they keep talking about these dark skies events and planning for that, is that they cut the power. Once they do that, a matter of days before it looks like the worst part of zombie movies, especially in major cities. But thereafter, their goals, again, with Agenda 21 is to sustainable development, to, quote, rewild much of the non-urban landscapes or rural landscapes, to get human development off that. And so they just simply say we can't provide services to those areas anymore. We can only provide them to these major cities, these smart cities. We're going to have to move you in here. And moreover, because we want to keep these wild places, by penalty of death, you can't go there. I think there will be people who try to resist that, and there'll be a lot of armed conflict in that regard, probably over a period of time. But those who submit to going within those major cities, it's going to be much like the movie Divergent. The walls are set up, or the M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong movie, The Village, where again it just only takes a couple of generations where you tell them that the people outside are infected zombies, they're cannibals, they'll eat you, and so if the guards don't get you, they will, and everybody will want to stay inside. So I think that again they do want to winnow us down, but they want to take the compliant folks in there, and I think that's part of what you see with all these what I think are litmus tests, things like what we're happening right now, that some people are waking up, and those who have already woken have woken up more, and those who are going with the programming are doubling down, tripling down, right? So those guys virtue signaling and showing how compliant they are. Those are the ones who want to that they want to keep in there. So there's that. All right, so more questions. These came from Megsy. Here we go. Some questions from Megsy. Some of them more serious. Many of them I've already talked about. What do I think about the COVID-19 thing? What should people do about surveillance? I think I've covered that and a number of things. Some of these were great. If you could have a conversation with any one of the world leaders and ask them anything, who would it be and what would you ask them? Well, if I consider that, I would think that first of all they would not tell me the truth, and so I couldn't trust them to give me the answer. And besides, if I was like asking it over dinner, I would just trying to be poison them. So it doesn't matter who it is. I would just be trying to stick a rusty fork in their neck. If I was a mad scientist, what scientific experiments would I do if money and resources were no object? That's a terrific question. And ethics weren't an issue. I have ethics, so even if ethics weren't an issue, I would probably still not do anything unethical. What would I hope to learn? Again, I talked earlier about water and the just miraculous, crazy thing that is. There's so much about water, especially again in terms of creation, the firmament, and the waters above and waters below, the great deep, and it's fascinating to me, and that we're mostly comprised of water. Water again shows an intelligence, not just memory, but seems to have preferences. We're comprised of it. Life can't exist without it. It's a fascinating thing. I would love to know that. I would love to know the nature of where we are and what that looks like. Very much I'm curious about, and this is the project I'm working on right now, the Awakening Project, trying to understand better how why it is that some people wake up and some don't, what we might do to ask these these hard questions and what we might do to get more people awake. That's what I'm working on right now, understanding the nature of people. But I think ultimately what I'd really like to know is, again, more about my creator. That's my biggest thing, is everything I understand more about him and them, the better I understand about everything else. And so that's a fascinating thing there. What mythical creature would improve the world if it existed? I know you're probably looking for unicorn or something there. I'm going to go with the chupacabra because they eat all the sheep. That's a joke. It's a joke. But yeah, sometimes I look at these people, I'm just like, oh my God. I continue saying I don't think it's a good idea to use epithets toward them or call people sheeple or anything. I don't think that's helpful in any way. Keeping in mind that we were once there, right? So, but I think in between us, I think sometimes it's easier to call a spade a spade. One of the most frequent terms Jesus used was calling people sheep. And that wasn't really a compliment because they're not very bright. It's a herd mentality. So I think he had it. He had it there. What would it be like if the world were filled with male and female clones of you? And again, I think that you wanted something really deep and philosophical here, but I'm going to tell you, Megsy, they'd be humping. There'd be a whole lot of freaky going on. Okay. Well, there you go. Okay, so just a quick moment. I think everybody seems to be tired and distracted, and now that Dawn told you that I do these pretty much all the shows. I just hang around my house all natural. My wife taught me that. So you guys got any questions that you've been pontificating or cogitating on during the show? I know, Dawn. So if any questions you want to get to before I ask my questions of you. Sue, I'm behind. What's so funny? Well, you're going to have to back it up and listen to the part where Megsy asked, if the world were filled with male and female clones of me, what would that world look like? And I basically said an orgy. So I don't know how to do that. All right. So questions from you guys. You want to jump in with any questions? This is probably, I know everybody's going to say this is the most boring episode I've yet done. But again, I just try to answer some of the questions, and I'll let you know why I didn't do it the way I was going to do it with the, with the response video. Well, I think I explained that at the top of the show because I don't have the tools right now to do that. So any questions? And I know there's a little bit of a lag here. What's my take? Brian asked, what's my take on the silver in the eyes? Do I think we could see each other's auras? Possibly. I don't know what we would see for sure, Brian, but I do know that what they tell us of pretty much everything is a lie, right? So the silver nitrite, when they put it in the eyes, I'm almost 100% that it blinds us to seeing more, right? And so whatever that is, and it just infuriates me. Better when naked. Dolly the sheep clone, right? Not boring. Thank you, Jay Armstrong. I appreciate that. Okay, so more. If you got more questions, hit me with it. Because I'm here for you, and then I'll have questions of my own for you guys. I'm just pausing here a moment for this stuff. Okay, so while I'm waiting for questions to come in, so I've got a great offer. How could I bore you? Well, wow, I don't know. Everybody's different. So I had one of a friend who's been a listener. She's awesome. We've been talking about a variety of things, including we've started a small Facebook group, and it's kind of limited and closed. So don't feel upset if you haven't been invited, because we're trying to do this really wisely. But in terms of ideas of how we can group together and prepare for what we think might be coming. It's just, and even not as even a prepper thing, just because we want to live off the grid in a way that is consistent with being at one with nature, and so we're trying to do this. So I would again encourage people to get together with that. Anyway, she's got a whole bunch of I do not consent stickers and like a bumper sticker thing, and so I want to give some of those away. So when you respond, hopefully via email to my questions, then if you want to include your mailing address, I'll send you a do not consent sticker. So again, these are free. I'm not asking, donations for that or whatever, but so there's that. If you want a bumper sticker that says I do not consent, let me know, and we'll get you that for your bumper stickering pleasure. Tell people you do not consent, and if you need multiples, let me know. So there we go. Let me see. Canadian Emergency Management. Yep. Beware of options. Never heard of silver nitrate. Look it up. Yeah, it's the first thing they do at birth is they put these in the eyes supposedly to prevent conjunctivitis, and that's no. So Dawn wants a sticker? Absolutely. Okay, so without any further questions, I'm going to then get on to my questions for you guys, which basically goes like this. So I've been thinking for a number of days, and so again, I'm back to the top of the show where I was saying that I wasn't able to really complete doing a video response, largely because I just don't have the tools for that right now. I borrowed a laptop just on the weekends. I can't, work on it really during the week. I just have a little bit of time, and so it's always a scramble on Saturday mornings just to get the little bits of visuals together for you guys. So I really hate the idea. I know a lot of people do like e-begging and stuff, and I know that there's some people, for example, Crow's got his site that has a membership thing, and I'm totally fine with that. They do it full time. I'm a contractor. So I can kind of a unique position where I can sort of set some hours, but of course I got to provide for my family and do that. But as I do that, and I'm becoming more involved with this, then I'm spending more and more time working on this. I'm frequently a guest on Secrets of Saturn on Wednesday nights. Next Friday, I'll be on Iron Realm Media. Been invited to be there, and I'll have to again leave work early to do that. And so every week I'm the time that I spend giving up $150, $200 worth of income to do this, and I'm not complaining. I do it because I love you guys and I want to spread as much as I can, but I also have to keep my commitments with my wife, and it's like she jealously guards the time that we have together. And again, we've been together for now almost 8 years, and we have never been separated even for like a minute other than work. So we've never been apart from one another, and we don't want to be, and we're naked all the time. Got that going too. So again, imagine what you want to on that. I got videos. I'll sell you. That's it. I'm going to sell homemade videos. No, I'm not going to do that. But I dislike the idea of creating a situation where people think that I'm trying to sell truth or anything like that. And I don't really care for e-begging, but some people have asked, if they can help or whatever they want to do. So after talking to Rose a little bit, I think here's what probably want to do, but I want to just get your take on it again. If there's a bunch of people go, man, it just makes it commercialized, I don't like it, then, I'll consider different ways of looking at it. But if there's like 10 people who say, yeah, absolutely, and one person that goes, I'll never listen again, I'll have to go with the 10 people just to keep the thing going. But setting up to begin with sort of a GoFundMe thing for just for some tools to get this, kind of going. So it doesn't have to be, sweet like that, but just a decent enough computer again that's got doesn't chug. It's got a decent graphics processor in it. I figured it cost me somewhere $1,200-$1,500 to really get it with the software. Probably a little closer to two to do it right, because you'll see the video at the end. It's got a big watermark on it, so if I can avoid that, it'd be great. So again, I want to keep the production value high and be able to do that. Right now, I'm just not able to do that. So I want to perhaps take that on. So some video editing software. I have some audio stuff that I can use, and probably just a couple more audio tools. But I'm pretty okay in that. Yeah, Megs, I think I'm probably just going to set up. I'm just specifically put stuff out. Exactly what's going on. I'm going to be totally transparent, and I am going to put my own funds in it. I'm not waiting for everybody else to say I'm not doing. No, I just don't have enough to do it right now. But I want to do it. Normally, I would just save the money and wait and then do it. So yeah, so informally hip, you say don't do GoFundMe. I'm totally open to other ideas there. Again, it's just a kind of a generic term like aspirin, but just some sort of crowdfunding sort of thing. And if you guys have got ideas for that, let me know with that. But just to give people an opportunity. So I'm kind of setting this out. So what I'd like to do is just get those tools, and then also, if possible, to look at. Well, I guess I got to go back over here. Is this going to work, or is it, oh, I know exactly that. Is to maybe get a camera again. I had a Sony A800, I think, that I had to sell, but P1000 or P900, I can even get one used. But so I can do some long distance shots over the Puget Sound. I can do some of that, so you know what I'm looking at there. Also, but it also does. I can add motion and make original video content for the show. So that's the idea there. So if I can get to that, that'd be even better. And then finally, a number of years ago, and I had for a number of years, the great Baldini.com. And then again, I let it lapse during that period where we were really, really struggling. And then some hijacking agency bought it, and they're trying to sell it back to me for like $3,800. I'm like, no. Get bent, but I would like to, if I can, get it back before the stage magician does, because he's not very good. There's a guy took the name Great Baldini, so their lease on it lapses this year, and I'm gonna try to just snipe it from him if I can. If not, I'll have to just let that go and do something else. But I did used to own it, so I'm hoping that ICANN will be all right with me trying to get it back. So I'd like to do that if possible. So again, I'll be very transparent with what I do if you guys choose to donate. But if you also let me know that you think that's a bad idea, don't do it, and I'll take that under advisement as well and just do what I can in terms of getting just a basic box. But if you guys are willing to help, and then more and more, again, as I dip into this more and more, and begin devoting more time to it. So the idea is, it was recommended me to do a Patreon thing. What I kind of struggle with on that, and I think that's fine, because that's the sort of thing, again, both of these are that I'm not charging. I'm not going to charge anybody for coming here. This content will always be free, because that's how I roll. It's like you can do it if you want to. Don't be offended if other people want to. It's fine. I'm not twisting anybody's arm for it. I just want to give people the opportunity to help. And this has been part of my experience with Dad as well, is that I'm always bad about asking people for help, and usually in my past I would just turn it down because I was too, I don't know if it's ego or whatever, but I didn't want to be a pain in the ass. I don't want to be the turd in the punch bowl. I don't want to let people know, that I was struggling or whatever. And it's like, ultimately I have to give people the opportunity to get the blessing out of what, if they want to help, let them do it. So it's just a way that, you guys, if you want to, you can help. I'm not, I'm not going, please help me. I'm not trying to do a Morgal thing and go, I'm in jail or I need some drugs, man. No, I'm not going to do that to you. Again, I'll let you know how and when and where, if we get the money, if I spend it, and what we're getting and what that looks like. So if you guys want to donate, absolutely. And again, I'll make sure you get these bumper stickers. I'll give you bumper stickers free anyway. If you just send your mailing address to unintended.consequences3@gmail.com. Or if you don't trust that, you can also, I'll put this, so we got unintended, I always misspell it. That's what's funny, is people keep going, I can't hear you. It's because I type too fast. And consequences at 03@gmail.com. So there's that. And then there's also P.O. Box 2248. Lynnwood, Washington. I'll just put it all together again so you guys can copy and paste it. P.O. Box 2248, Lynnwood, Washington 98036. And so you can hit me up that way. So let me know. I'll get you one of these generously donated stickers. It says, I do not consent. So you can get that. And let's see here. So we got, I do not consent. You grow cannabis. Awesome. I use cannabis, but usually high test, critical extraction, vaping is kind of where I'm at now. The smell is really, a little bit much for Mom. She wishes she could consume the THC, but it's just not her thing. It it kind of makes her ill. So if you die from the COVIDs, you've been murdered. Shadows that glow. I totally hear that. If I die from the COVID, something's terribly wrong. All right, so at an hour and a half in, I guess we're coming to the end of it here. So basically what I want from you guys is if you just let me know, again, I gave you the email, unintended.consequences3, or you can even just put in the comment section whether you approve or disapprove. And if you've got specific ideas of some other crowdfunding way to do it other than GoFundMe or whatever, then let me know that. I don't know much about it, honestly, because I'm not going to stick my hand out, all the time. But the idea is I think I'm okay with doing a Patreon thing that give people the opportunity to kind of monthly donate, and that'll tell me how much time I can commit to spending on this. So the more time I can spend on it, the better the content can be, because I can make it a little smoother, and so you'll have a little more fun with it. A PayPal address, I don't have one right now, Janet. Used to. Maybe I'll have to. My wife used to, but neither of us have used it for a long time. I mean, it's a long story, but we'll figure something out, right? So I realized that I should have had it all ready for you. If I was really trying to get your money, I'd do it as right now, so you can don't wait, get in right now. I want everybody to have an opportunity to think about it, make sure that this is something they want to do. I'm not trying to again dig into your pockets. I'm just saying, hey, I want to serve you guys, and I can do that better with some better tools. And I'm kind of stuck right now. I can only bring a laptop that barely works home, every weekend, and so just barely have time to put this stuff together for you. But I want to make it nice and want to make it helpful for you. So to that end, yeah, we'll give you the opportunity, and I'll announce next week how we're going to do that. So also shameless plugs. Again, look for me from time to time on Secrets of Saturn. That's the Wednesday night stream, which goes from 6 to 9 p.m. Or 6 to 8 p.m. I guess it is Pacific time. And that's Wednesdays whenever they ask me. Rose 777, and I have started a new podcast, the PoppyCock Report. That's right, the PoppyCock Report. Well, we're a little bit goofy, but we're calling PoppyCock on all the news stuff and all these all these things going on around us. We're just calling PoppyCock, but keeping it fairly lightweight. A little bit of fun, kind of like a radio morning show, if you will. So we're doing that Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 6 a.m. Yep, the early bird show. 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, UTC again -7. That's the PoppyCock Report with Rose 777 and I, and then whoever else we might have. But it's just an hour show, real quick in and out, and nobody gets hurt. Just time for you to get your coffee going. So we got that also appearing this coming Friday on Iron Realm Media. And I believe that at least I'll have to see if we're doing it live or whether it's a recorded show. So I'll catch you up on that. And so, just you can hit me up on Facebook, Target, Targe, just like Target with no T. So Target Baldini at Facebook. You can hit me up there. Be my friend. And I hope that we have some mutual friends or whatever, because it's sometimes hard to tell. I approved a couple of people, and I started getting spam like crazy. And it took me for hours to track it back. So there's that. So again, 6 a.m. too early, but again, these are all you don't have to catch it live. You can of course always do it on the replay, because we have that too. I'll put once this renders, I'll put links to all these things in the description. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Megsy is awesome. She's absolutely amazing. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Let me go to the beginning here. We'll have a little outro thing. This was, again, suggested by Megsy. This is one of the songs she liked, and I didn't. Again, all these songs that you're hearing at the end, it's all original stuff, most of it written by Joe and myself a number of years ago in the 90s, the late 80s through the mid 90s. These particular recordings were ones that I found that were just rehearsal tracks, meant it's guide tracks for a band. Later in the early 2000s in Northern California, I had a band, and they wanted to cover some of these originals. So we had recorded these so that we could all practice at home. And so it's just a very odd recording. We didn't spend a lot of time. The production values are pretty low, but it at least gives you the idea of the footprint of the song. And Joe and I have talked about doing stuff at the end. So Megsy, she's like, song, please, give me the song. So I agreed to include this song, even though it's one of the odder ones, because it matched the title and the theme, which is the Q&A. So with that, guys, have a great week. It's been always a pleasure hanging out with you, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. So love you guys. Take care. Send me an email again, unintended.consequences3. I'll spam it again during the song on the outro, and let me know what's going on. You can contact me if you have any ideas. Let me know, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks, guys.
I can't believe the questions you ask. Are you still my friend? You should know after all that has passed, I am here to the end. And yes, it makes me feel like a fool, knowing I haven't come through for you. And no, it's not the same when you call out my name. I can't believe the things that you ask. Don't you know what it means to speak the words that you've given me, to tell of my dreams? And yes, I think that I'll be okay once I let go and you have your way. And no, I'm not afraid, I just don't know what to say. I can't believe the time that has passed, and it's getting near dark. You should be almost home by